Tatian lived in Rome and wrote around AD 170. He was born in Assyria, but was converted while living in Rome. He was a student of Justin Martyr. After Justin's martyrdom, Tatian began to sway towards aestheticism, that is, the teaching that various practices not taught in the scriptures, made a person more righteous. Irenaeus wrote that Tatian began his own sect of Christianity called the Encratites. From the writings of later pre-Nicene Christians, it appears that this group maintained the major points of theology and doctrines of the New Testament, but added to it their aesthetic practices. For example, Irenaeus wrote that they required celibacy and vegetarianism for all. Origen wrote that they did not acknowledge Paul's letters as scripture. Tatian was expelled by the church in Rome, moved to Syria, and became a missionary there. About Tatian's aestheticism, Hippolytus wrote, "Although Tatian was himself a disciple of Justin the Martyr, he did not entertain similar opinions with his master. Similarly with Marcion, he stated that marriage is destruction." Jerome wrote about Tatian's aestheticism. Tatian, the chief of the Encratites, endeavored to build his heresy, asserting that wine is not to be drunk, since it was commanded in the law that the Nazarites were not to drink wine. Although Tatian's life has somewhat of a sad conclusion, Tatian will always be remembered for compiling the Diatessaron. The name Diatessaron means out of four. Tatian combined the four Gospels into this one work. It was probably originally written in his native language of Aramaic. He did this with incredible accuracy and did not add anything of his own to the Gospels. In fact, Tatian only omitted about 56 verses from the four Gospels, and most of these were genealogies. It is in chronological order to the best of Tatian's knowledge. The Diatessaron was used for the reading of the Gospels by Aramaic-speaking Christians in Syria. This was their scripture of the Gospels until the early 5th century. Thus it makes sense that when the Diatessaron quotes from the Old Testament, its quotations follow the readings of the Peshitta, which is a 2nd century translation of the Old and New Testaments into Aramaic. Around AD 423, Theodoret, bishop of Syras, Syria, began a movement in order to destroy all copies of the Diatessaron because he believed Tatian purposely removed the genealogies to imply that Jesus was not a descendant of David. Because he destroyed so many copies, it eventually became very scarce and developed a reputation for being heretical. In Western Christianity, around the same time, as the Church began using the Vulgate, the Latin translation of the Scriptures, the Diatessaron lost popularity. But the Diatessaron survived, and its value was again recognized. In the 11th century, it was translated into Arabic, and later into Persian. Also, Tatian included the last 12 verses of Mark. This shows that from such an early date as AD 170, these verses were recognized as being written by Mark. The Diatessaron is also an early witness that there are only 4 true Gospels. Less than 20 years after Tatian, Irenaeus wrote that the Church only accepted 4 Gospels. Today, the Diatessaron has become invaluable, showing how the Gospels, as we have them today, do not differ from the 2nd century. The Muratorian fragment was written in Rome around AD 170. It is called Muratorian because it was discovered in Milan, Italy, by Ludovico Antonio Muratori in the 1730s. It is called a fragment because it is a portion, only 85 lines, of a larger work. The fragment gives a list of books or letters that were accepted by the Church in Rome. It is the oldest list of New Testament books that helped Christians establish their canon, which means a list of officially accepted scriptures. As for the New Testament, it lists the 4 Gospels, Acts, the 13 letters of Paul, 2 of John's letters, Jude, and Revelation. It does not mention Hebrews, James, any letters of Peter, or a 3rd letter of John. It also lists the Book of Wisdom, implying that it was received by all, stating that it was written by the friends of Solomon in his honor. The Book of Wisdom is not found in Protestant Bibles, but is found in Catholic and Orthodox Bibles. It was translated and placed in the Apocrypha of the original King James Version. As for the disputed books, it lists the Apocalypse of Peter and the Shepherd of Hermas, and explains that some Christians did not allow these to be read in church. As for rejected books, it mentions the letter to the Laodiceans and the letter to the Alexandrians. It states that these were forged in Paul's name by the heretical followers of Marcion, whose teachings were semi-Gnostic. It also lists other heretics by name, saying that none of their works were accepted. These include Valentinus and Basilides, both of whom were Gnostics. I encourage you to download the PDF from the link in the description. The Muratorian fragment is only one page. It is a fascinating window into 2nd century Christianity and how the Christians viewed Scripture. Theophilus lived in Syrian Antioch around AD 175. Theophilus was raised a pagan. When he wrote to non-Christians, he had a quality of writing that was both gentle yet stern, for he had little patience toward the pagan religions around him. He was the first Christian to write a commentary on the Gospels, but the only works from him that have survived are his letters to his friend Autolycus. One of his greatest contributions to Christianity was his chronology of the world's history. He had much to say about this. Here is an excerpt. From the creation of the world to the flood were 2,242 years, and from the flood to the time when our forefather Abraham begat his son were 1,036 years, and from Abraham's son Isaac to the time when the people dwelt with Moses in the desert were 660 years, and from the death of Moses and the rule of Joshua son of Nun to the death of the patriarch David were 498 years, and from the death of David and the reign of Solomon to the sojourning of the people in the land of Babylon were 518 years, 6 months, 10 days. And from the government of Cyrus to the death of Emperor Aurelius Verus were 744 years. All the years of the creation of the world amount to a total of 5,698 years. In short, Theophilus places the creation of the world in 5529 BC. Melito was an overseer in Sardis in Asia Minor and wrote around AD 165. It is highly likely that he knew Polycarp. Melito was martyred around AD 177. Like his contemporary Christian writers, Justin, Athenagoras, and Theophilus, he wrote apologies, which are written defenses of Christianity. Melito wrote an apology to Emperor Marcus Aurelius. About Melito, pre-Nicene Christians wrote, "Who is ignorant of the books of Irenaeus and Melito, and the rest, which declare Christ to be God and man?" Athenagoras lived in Athens and wrote in AD 177. Like Justin Martyr, he was well versed in philosophy. Also, like Aristides and Justin before him, Athenagoras wrote apologies, that is, defenses, of the Christian faith. Athenagoras called his apologies embassies. It is possible that Clement of Alexandria was one of his students. Athenagoras' original goal was to combat Christianity, but when he read the scriptures, he was converted to Christianity. It is probable that Acts 17 helped convert him, as he read how Paul came to his home city of Athens and preached concerning the altar to the unknown God. He wrote an apology, or embassy, titled Plea on Behalf of the Christians, which was addressed to Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Athenagoras wrote many works, but the only other work that has survived is called On the Resurrection of the Dead. Irenaeus was an overseer in Gaul, which is modern-day Lyons, France, around AD 180. He was probably a native of Smyrna because, as a boy, he was a personal student of Polycarp. Therefore, there are only 2 degrees of separation between Irenaeus and the Apostle John. Hippolytus was one of his students. Unlike many of his contemporary writers, Irenaeus was raised in a Christian family. Having grown up in the eastern side of the Roman Empire and later living in the western side, Irenaeus became an important link in the church. He was so respected that when an argument arose between the bishops of Rome and the bishops of Asia Minor over when to celebrate Pascha, that is, Christ's resurrection, he intervened and brought peace. Irenaeus' most famous work is called Against Heresies, in which he battled many religions that opposed Christianity, especially Gnosticism and its utter absurdities. He began his journey of cataloging heresies when he visited Rome in the 170s. There he rebuked friends as well as the Bishop of Rome for embracing strange doctrines. His work explains the beliefs of many pagan religions of the 2nd century with incredible accuracy. Irenaeus was martyred in AD 202 during the persecution under Emperor Septimius Severus. About Irenaeus, pre-Nicene Christians wrote, "There is Irenaeus, that very exact inquirer into all doctrines." The blessed presbyter Irenaeus has powerfully and elaborately refuted the opinions of these heretics. Who is ignorant of the books of Irenaeus and Melito and the rest, which declare Christ to be God and man? Clement, whose full name was Titus Flavius Clemens, was an overseer in Alexandria, Egypt, and wrote around AD 195. Like Justin Martyr, Clement of Alexandria was raised a pagan and went on a personal pilgrimage to find truth. And also like Justin, this led him to Jesus Christ. Pantaenus, who began a catechetical school, that is, a school for new converts, in Alexandria, was Clement of Alexandria's teacher. Athenagoras might also have taught Clement. After Pantaenus left Alexandria in AD 189 to become a missionary in India, Clement took over the catechetical school. Clement's students included Origen and Hippolytus of Rome. Like Justin Martyr and Irenaeus before him, Clement of Alexandria was one of the first writers to write an extensive amount of Christian literature. Beginning with Clement's writings, the attitudes of the church appear to change. By the days of Clement of Alexandria, it seems that paganism has shown clear signs of decline. By the same token, Christianity had become well known in every corner of the Roman Empire and beyond. Even though Christianity was still illegal and punishable by death, and there were still intense persecutions to come, Clement's writings show some of the first signs that the attitudes of the Church moved more away from primitive orthodoxy and more towards institutional orthodoxy. When the persecutions under Emperor Septimius Severus became intense, Clement fled to Syrian Antioch in AD 202. He may have died around AD 220. Clement of Alexandria did much good for the church. He was the famous teacher of the catechetical school in Alexandria and helped bring up one of the most intelligent Christian writers in history, Origen. Clement of Alexandria is notably marked by his extremely kind and loving spirit.